Hello and welcome to this blog here on the fourth week of the Certified Technical Architect. My name is Jakob Anker Nielsen and I will be presenting some of the ins and outs of this week, following up on last week and maybe looking a bit forward to next week as well. So last week we discussed architectural standards. So this is about TOGAF, IT for IT. We talked about ServiceNow Blueprint and the different architectural standards here, such as phased interaction map, capability mapping, product adoption roadmap, and others. This week here, we are going into the delivery side of things. So from week 2, where we discuss common service data model as the foundation for understanding the service we are to onboard and implement, going into week 3 with the architectural standards, achieving a common language for how we're going to collaborate together. Going into this week here with how we do the actual delivery in terms of Agile versus Waterfall, how we can support it with technical governance, how we can manage our release and instance strategies to support this. On the Agile framework, to me, this has been actually quite a new phenomena. It's very old in some sense, but I never really took the time to read some of the theory. So here I have been introduced to a bit more of it, and some of it was a bit surprising because it's not just Agile and Scrum, it's not really the same thing. And when you talk about Scrum, you don't really talk about how you can scale it as well. So that's where SAFe and Scrum of Scrums comes into the picture, which I find pretty interesting as well, as I'm also currently developing a standard for service organization onboarding at scale. So it kind of fits together with this, where the service onboarding at scale, it's kind of the foundation for like the common service data model, understanding your service and the blueprint and so on, and getting it all in the system and make sure you have the support organization, the different items to request and incident, ITSM workflows, and whatever application you need up and running in a holistic perspective from a service perspective. Going into the delivery of things, because that is also a part of this onboarding of a service organization. There is one part that is, the first part will be much about understanding the requirements and understanding the organization that will be delivering and involved in the onboarding, going into the service definition and mapping into ServiceNow standards. And then finally to the more delivery-phased function of making sure that the critical gaps between the as-is processes of the service organization to be onboarded and the current incident processes and so on, that those gaps, they are captured as user stories and developed and so on. And that's where the scaled Scrum teams, Agile, comes into play. Here, it allows you to align a lot of Scrum teams with Scrum of Scrum, for example. So that, to me, is a very simple example. This is kind of just representative for each of the Scrum teams that meet up and align on the overall perspectives. Very simplistically explained here, of course. Nonetheless, find it interesting, and I will be thinking about how I can maybe join those two ideas of scalability across service organization onboarding, as well as SAFe and Scrum of Scrums perhaps in the future. The next topic we were discussing is technical governance. Technical governance is something that I spent a lot of time contemplating. I've gone through all of the official resources on ServiceNow repositories, both internal and external, that I have access to. It sounded like there was some secret server I don't have access to. It's not that 007-ish. Though So I already went through all of this material and I structured into a starter template of sorts to kind of put a chronology to all of the many different resources already available. So I came in with, at worst, bias and preconception about what technical governance is, and at best, well prepared on the topic. Additionally, I have been working for 6 months or so on a technical governance analysis about 3 days a week for a large enterprise with over 140,000 employees. So this topic here is very interesting to me. And the key takeaways that I would give to you around technical governance: it's not meant to be boring, or it's not meant to be red tape, it's not meant to be bureaucracy. It's meant to ensure that you're going into the right direction. So there are different types of governance. You have your strategic governance, that is ensuring that you are strategizing. And then you have your portfolio governance, that is ensuring that the strategic direction is mirrored into the decision making for your portfolio, what you are putting into the backlog and what you're planning and so on. Going into the technical governance, where it becomes more operationalized. So how do we make sure that throughout the delivery phase, for example, from service or feature conception until product increment or release, that we are including the end goal or strategic direction into every asset of this, and how can we actually measure that we are getting towards the goal that we have assigned, so it doesn't become small islands of, I think this is nice, so let's do this small button over here. I like this process, and this is how I used to do it in Outlook, so let's do that over there in that process of ServiceNow, and so on. But to make it a bit more unbiased and strategic, essentially, in how the platform changes over time. To achieve this, it is very important that you have a governance board of sorts. So you can have different levels. Often organizations would just have one that is also the design authority. In large and mature organizations, or just large and complex organizations, I would propose you would need to have one technical governance board that is responsible for the performance of the delivery function of this enterprise here, when it comes to ServiceNow at least, and responsible for setting the policies that are to be consumed and guide the delivery function, its management, and its participants on how to deliver correctly in line with the technical best practices, security, and strategic alignment. So that was the first layer with the technical governance board. And then you may have the design authority board. So one is kind of owning and accountable for the process, while the design authority would be the board where you would escalate customizations to and establish whether they fall under the criteria for business market customization as prescribed by ServiceNow, or whatever enterprise standards you may have for technical delivery. You can merge these two together, but to have a separate function called technical governance, it does make sense, especially when it comes to maturing out of only have design authority into maybe also having process authority, and also having policies against your test process, your different test processes and peer reviews, and other sorts of governing functions and entities that you may have in your delivery function, to kind of get a centralized reporting mechanism stood up, where you can get an overview of the efficiency of your delivery function when it comes to achieving all of its intended targets. To achieve this, it is also very important to establish feedback loops. So it's not just enough to find, for example, the policy or standard for business market customization and then putting it onto SharePoint and say, now we have technical governance policies, that's fine. No, it's not. It's about making sure that you have some artifacts that you can actually take up into consideration when having, for example, a design authority. So you have a rubric that standardizes across all of your customization proposals. It is in terms of what business value it has, if it's what technical debt it incurs, and so on. So there's no bias in the decision as to whether you should pursue the technical customization or not. So you need to actually use it is the first leg, and the second leg is that you need to also reflect on it. You need to run iterations on it. So as you do your design authority, for example, you would catch all of the non-conformities against the policies that you have defined. Maybe you have coding practices, so you will capture all of the non-conformances in terms of coding practices that you find in peer reviews and in health scans and so on, and you will bring that back to the policy for central reporting. Then over time you will start to build a picture of these different policies that we set out there for a reason. Are we following? Is the organization, the delivery function, actually living up to those standards here? Or is there something we need to fine-tune? Maybe in the policies they don't make sense, maybe in the way they are or are not being used, and so on. So the policies then, by letting them be feedback mechanisms, they become adapted to the context and evolve over time to make sure that they are appropriate and relevant to the entire delivery organization, and not just from a theoretical standpoint where we can put something into SharePoint and be satisfied that we have ticked off the governance box. Right. Release and instance strategy. I believe I talked a bit about this last week. Instance strategy. One aspect that I found interesting here is that we actually could, if we wanted to map our release cycle and our Agile framework into an instance strategy, to understand how our instance strategy supports the way that we have decided to define our operating model when it comes to delivery. So in this way, we can be more mindful about the instance strategy that we have. For example, would we need to have a sandbox and a UAT instance besides the standard development test and production? If that's the case, it might be that you have some very concerned stakeholders. You need to involve them early and often, and as such, you can kind of map that concern into your delivery function as well through the infrastructure itself, as well as the Agile method, by relating these two. Finally, I would like to reflect a bit on last week, where I did a presentation on architectural standards. What surprised me here is that I got ranges of my team, to be more exact, but I did the presentation. So my team got scores ranging from maximum to, which is 15 to 7 across the standardized rubric score from our peers. So why, you might ask yourself, is that the case? And it goes to show the importance of empathizing with the audience. So in this case, we are presenting to a simulated audience, a persona with different needs and wants, and we're trying to cater to them as best as possible. Some people feel we did this, some people did not. Maybe some people bring in their own bias to this as well, so that further complicates it. But the fact of the matter is that some people did not feel that the objectives of the presentation or workshop was adequately met, and as such a low score. So interesting to me is not, is that right or wrong? Because it is right from their perspective, and this might be the stakeholder that we will meet in the future. So this is where it's important to be open to feedback. So what I should be more aware of here is to make sure it doesn't become too theoretical. Can you imagine the presentation that I'm doing with diagrams? So, and it also needs to be more tangible for the audience, to be something that they can see themselves in a bit more. I lean very much towards making sure everything makes sense on a logical level. That is my preparation for making sure everything will work on the tactical level once we start implementing as well. But there's surely a balance to be struck here, I feel. So of course it's good to get 15 points, but is it then better to get 12 points and on like a stable 12 instead of sometimes 7, sometimes 15? I think you can discuss that, but for sure, if I know the audience, if you know the audience and we can read the audience as well, then we can adapt. So it's important to be able to have empathy and to be able to pivot the presentation to the communication needs of your audience. That's what I guess I'm trying to get at. So thank you for listening in, and have a good one. See you next week.